So I'm going to be very optimistic and knowing that generally no cars ever come down here, and hope that no car comes down here in the space of time that we are here for. But behind me, if it does, please don't get run over for the sake of the tour. Behind me is the iconic, beautiful new college. It's the chaplaincy part of the University of Edinburgh Divinity School. I studied there myself when I was a little baby-faced first year. So it's a beautiful building. It's lovely. And it also, behind it, if you have been into the quad, and I'm not going to go in just in case somebody chases us away, but if you do go into the quad, you will see a beautiful church spire behind it. And Assembly Hall is in there as well. This is where the General Assembly of the Church of Scotland used to meet, and I think sometimes do still meet, but not nearly as rented. Pardon? Once a year. Thank you very much. So we learn something new every day. Oh, amazing. So this is where they used to meet. Inside is also John Knox. If anyone knows much about John Knox, you will know he's not a very nice man. But this is about another not very nice man who also was very heavily linked to New College and to the General Assembly of the Church of Scotland. His name was Alexander Duff, and Alexander Duff was very important to India and the British relationship with India. So before that, a little bit of context to the British and India. The British and India is an incredibly complex story, so I will not get into all of the nitty-gritty of how it came to be in British hands. It's very debated and is currently being revised among historical circles and community-based history circles. But essentially, the long story short is, from around the 1600s onwards, an increased presence of English people occurred in India through a company called the East India Trading Company, or the EIC. The East India Trading Company slowly but surely became quite successful. They gained footholds in India. They claimed that they needed a military presence to protect their assets, so they gained a large army over time. This large army was incredibly convenient whenever they quite wanted some land. And whenever they quite wanted some land, this large army would be very useful. Also, at the same time, they were fighting wars with France in India, which would gain them more and more of the French territory. And the key ruling dynasty of the time, the Mughals, we remember William Fraser, big fan of them. The Mughal dynasty was at its weakest it had ever been. It was on the brink of collapsing. It would not become fully extinct, essentially, until 1857, with something that we'll talk about later. But this is where we stood, with the Mughals really starting, it's going to be okay. He really likes the Mughals too, don't worry. With Mughal power starting to collapse, some historians have argued there was a power vacuum, and the EIC and the British were more than happy to fill that power vacuum. And they did so with amazing power and force, using their military prowess. They fought a great series of wars, and this great series of wars ended up with India being in British hands. But at the turn of the 1800s, it still was very much a trading outpost, a colony to extort, not one to colonize in those ways of actually going over there and trying to civilize them. Until the church, partly supported by William Wilberforce, a key figure, of course, in abolition, was able to pressure the government into renewing the EIC's charter for India only if they allowed missionaries into India. Hitherto, missionaries were not allowed. It was a no-go area, believing that if people went over trying to tell Indians that their religion was not right, they might get annoyed and might notice all the other horrible things going on. So they were trying to keep it as limited as possible. However, missionaries do start to go over. And Alexander Duff, who was chair of the General Assembly of the Church of Scotland, was one of the first. He became chair and governor of it in 1829, and essentially used his power and position to get himself sent out. In 1830, he led one of the very first missions to India. So again, we see a key Scottish figure, a well-educated Scottish figure, an incredibly powerful Scottish figure, being on the front line of cultural empiricism and cultural colonisation. He went, and indeed started off very unsuccessfly. And some would argue that he ended up being very successful. I'm not so sure. But one of the main reasons he was so unsuccessful was because Alexander Duff, by all accounts, and you can genuinely go and read his sermons, and you can read the information, that's what I'm going to be quoting from. Again, I will post a link to his speeches that were recorded right here at the National Assembly post his time in India. Comes across as a dour man. He's not a happy, excitable figure, that is for sure. He comes across as a dour man. He didn't get on with Indian people. And he essentially argued that the use of vernacular language, so speaking Hindi, speaking the vast myriad of different dialects that you get in India, was pointless because they were too stupid to understand it if they didn't speak English. He argued that essentially it was useless unless you only spoke to upper class boys who could be impressionable. So after trying to speak to Hindus, after trying to win them over, and Indians across the continent, Muslims too, he decided that the best way was to take high class Hindu boys and try and convert them, essentially, believing that their knowledge would filter down. If you have been to India today, you will notice it does not have a gigantic Christian population. So Alexander Duff, for me, was not that successful. But he says things like, after opening his school in Calcutta, which would go on to define the way Indian education worked and still works to this day. And if anyone has been over there, taught there, or experienced Indian education, you might agree with me that there are some serious problems with the Indian education system. They stem from this moment in history, from this man, Alexander Duff. He says things like this: like older Hindus, they demanded I should show them my authority. So these are the younger boys. i.e. that I should show them satisfactory evidence for the assertion that Christianity is an authentic revelation from God. But totally unlike the older Hindus, these were able to comprehend the nature of evidence, because of course he was working with good, honest evidence, and they were not. That's how it worked. They had studied our language, our histories, our science. They are initiated into the first principles of inductive reasoning. Behold, then, the incalculable advantage we possessed when addressing this class of Hindus. So essentially, if you take people from a very young age and indoctrinate them with your language and alienate them from their own people, they will be more likely to believe you. Fair enough, I suppose, but not the nicest, maybe, way of approaching cultural crossover. He also says that older Hindus might well have understood his good Christian messages. However, the want of liberal education prevented them from comprehending its nature and force. He refers to the Hindu character as yielding and fickle as the shifting quicksands, avaricious, feeble and cowardly. But divine grace is able to conquer it. It can make the feeble powerful and convert the coward into a hero. So as you can see, he was a big fan of Indian people, really got on very well with them. And it's this kind of thing that I don't think, at least when I was reading about it at uni and reading about this in school, you would read this with quite a benign concept, with quite a benign face. These are the ideas that still underpin modern racism and modern ideas of aggression and hatred. This idea that somebody is less intelligent than you because of the colour of their skin and their culture. And this will come up again on our tour. And again, we see Scots as playing key roles within this world. Alexander Duff is just one of so very many. William Fraser was another. There were loads, and we will come back to it. Now we have a choice, my friends. For the next part of our tour, we must go up to the Castle Esplanade. Now, there are two ways. There is the long way round, which is slightly less hilly, but will take slightly longer. Or we can take the short way round, which is really quite hilly and might end up with us being out of breath. If there is anyone who objects to the short way round, we will take the long way round, as I'm not about making people feel bad. So how do we feel? Is there anybody who's passionate about not taking the long way round? This is to make sure you feel absolutely comfortable. We're all happy? We will take the short route? Okay, we will see how it goes. I'm going to be out of breath, so I admire